to just jump right into it today. Last time, I talked about two characteristics that should make the gospel attractive and magnetic. And you find them in 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 15, where Peter writes, "But in your hearts, revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to anyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have, but do this with gentleness and respect." Gentleness and respect. When people see hope in our lives, when we demonstrate that we're people of hope, they'll want to know how that happened. And really, the question that they're asking is, how do I get some of that? We get this privilege, as Paul calls us, ambassadors for Christ, as representatives of the Lord, to give an answer to anybody who asks us the reason for our hope. And these two qualities that I talked about last time, gentleness and respect, ought to describe the general demeanor of every Christian. Does this mean that every Christian is just a wimpy, wet noodle kind of, gosh, everything's fine, you're nice, and the whole thing about the Bible is just, let's be nice to each other? No. But when we stand firm for what God is firm about, we must do that with gentleness and respect. There's a big difference between me standing firm and expressing myself with gentleness and respect than me just putting my dukes up and saying, bring it, I love a good fight. I'm afraid that there are a lot of Christians in the world who have kind of projected the idea that Christians are all about getting in the fight and everything makes them mad. Well, that's unfortunate. It doesn't really reflect the nature of Jesus. Jesus got really angry on a few occasions, and he acted on his anger on at least two of those occasions when he kicked over the tables of the money changers and drove out the livestock from the temple. I don't suppose that was quite gentle. And I suppose in some ways it was a little disrespectful of the money changers and the livestock folks, but it was ultimately respectful of the temple and what the temple was supposed to be. Well, we can debate that for a long, long time. I am not saying become a wimp for Jesus. You know what? Jesus doesn't need any more wimps. If you are a wimp, come on to Jesus and let him give you hope and courage. And let's just see what happens. Well, keeping a clear conscience, he says next, and this is in verse 16. But do this with gentleness and respect, keeping a clear conscience, so that those who speak maliciously against your good behavior in Christ may be ashamed of their slander. This is interesting to me, keeping a clear conscience. When you give an answer for the hope that you have, for the reason for the hope that you have, you do this with gentleness and respect, keeping a clear conscience. And here's why I think that matters. There are two reasons that we can sustain a clear conscience. It's not like getting a clear conscience. That's not what Peter said. Keeping a clear conscience. I'm going to talk about for a little longer than maybe you would expect. Well, you've been listening to me for a while, maybe, so you probably expect me to talk about it for a while. The conscience. Wow. Our world, really, most of our world has so re-engineered and re-educated its conscience that it permits anything. The Bible talks about this process as having a seared conscience, a numbed conscience. See, our conscience is a gift from God. There's a thing within us, unless you have some kind of actual brain damage or some kind of neurological disorder, there is a thing in you that prompts you concerning what is right and wrong. That's what your conscience is. Now, it is there, having that capability is a gift from God. But the conscience has to be educated. And that's what happens to us over time. We gain our first education of conscience from our family of origin. That's where we begin to learn, both by direct instruction and by indirect observation, what is right and what is wrong in my family. And this becomes the foundation, the footing for what I believe is right or wrong in the world. The conscience is a very, very important piece of who everyone is. You remember in Pinocchio, Pinocchio's conscience was represented by the cricket, Jiminy, who would sit on his shoulder and speak into his ear, no, you don't want to do that. Try not. But, Pinocchio was not a great listener. Well, I don't know if he was not a great listener or whether he just wanted to do what he wanted to do. And I think the second is the case. I think he just wanted to do what he wanted to do. And every time that he disregarded Jiminy's advice, it wound up ending not well. You know what? Your conscience is not really Jiminy Cricket, but your conscience is the part of you in your heart and mind that speaks into your decision making. When your conscience is clear, you generally have a great emotional freedom. But you have to think back maybe, but when was the last time that your conscience wasn't clear? That is an uncomfortable place to be. It's a struggle, because without a clear conscience, I'm not settled emotionally. And this is probably, in the most objective sense, this is a good thing, because when I have done something that violated my conscience, my standards, my beliefs about what is right and wrong, I'm supposed to have a feeling about that. And the feeling is supposed to prompt me to think about it. Well, Peter says, I could go longer on the conscience thing, but by now I'm probably boring you. So I'm going to just come back to what Peter writes. Keeping a clear conscience. As we answer those who ask us for a reason for the hope that we have, and we do it with gentleness and respect, that's one way to keep our conscience clear. Here's what I think that comes to. When I give an answer after I've been asked, and I do this with gentleness and respect. See, that's the timeline. That's the process. When I do this, I can maintain a clear conscience because of two things. First of all, I'm representing the Spirit of Christ. I'm representing who he was and how he was. Second thing is, I'm treating that person with regard. Right now in America, we're on what I think, when we get far enough past it and can look back on it, will be a very interesting sociological time period. So much unrest. And one of the pieces of unrest has to do with equality. And a group, which I'm not going to get into the politics or even the morality aspect, but I will say that a group that is promoting unrest is on the front page everywhere. I tuned in for as much as I could stand of the NBA's opening games. And on the back of the shirts, on the front of the warm-up gear was Black Lives Matter. Yes, Black Lives Matter. Because you matter. Whatever color your skin is, you matter. Then I saw a thing on an ad on TV that promoted the whole concept of, I think their motive and the value they were promoting was that equality should be for everyone. And I don't disagree. I'm fully in agreement with that. And then the tagline was, until Black Lives Matter, no lives matter. I suppose that's true. I think you ought to be able to say that about every color. Anyway, every color of skin. The point is, if you're a human being, you matter. I know this will sound political to some, and I don't intend for it to be political. I'm just talking about, I'm talking about a matter of conscience, that if you're alive, you matter. Unborn babies, whom I believe to be alive, matter. Children and adults with mental issues, and we're afraid to use words like disabilities, but because that sounds so harsh. But people with disabilities matter. People from another part of the country, another part of the world, another belief system, they matter. Everybody matters. And when I can respond to people with gentleness and respect, I can keep my conscience clear because I'm treating them as though they matter. Now, I know you could take that principle and extrapolate it so far out of reason that it becomes just another silly thing in the world, and I don't want to do that. I'm not suggesting that at all, but I am suggesting, well, let me just ask you this way. How different would the world be if each one of us treated everyone else as though they mattered? Their habits bother me. Their background is so different than mine. Their belief system is different from mine. But instead of disregarding them, what if I treated them with regard? And what if my hope, because when I'm encountering these kinds of people from these other backgrounds, what if I carry this hope well enough that they ask me to give an answer for a reason for the hope that I have, and then I can do that with gentleness and respect? How different do you think the world would be? Well, I don't think that's a guarantee that the world is going to be rainbows and unicorns, if I can use my favorite phrase for silliness. It's not going to be perfect. There are going to be people that even when I treat them with gentleness and respect, they're not going to give a rip. They're not changing, and they're not buying into my ideas. That's their deal, okay? My deal is to maintain in my heart and mind my attitude, my self-control, so that I can treat them with gentleness and respect. And by doing this, you keep a clear conscience so that those who speak maliciously against your good behavior in Christ may be ashamed of their slander. You see, Peter's end game on that idea is you're going to get, there will be people who are going to try and demonize your good behavior in Christ. Things that you're doing because of the Spirit of Christ in you, and you're trusting in Him as you live your life out. And what you want to defend that behavior with is not your words, but your ways. Gentleness and respect, giving you a clear conscience, so that when you are slandered, and he implies that you will be, those who slander you will be ashamed. Wow. That's kind of out there in some ways, isn't it? I mean, when I think about the realities of the world I live in day by day, that seems a little bit out there, but it's not. It really is right here. We're going to come back next time and look more into what Peter writes. I hope I get to connect with you this way then on Soul Care with Stevie Boy.